Sorry, I got to do that again.
No, no, that was enjoyable.
That's all right. Hold on, I get it. Stand by. And once again, good to see you. This is Get Going with GEPAR. I'm your host, Ernesto Garcia, Communications Director for the Greater El Paso Association of Realtors. And we're glad that you're able to tune in and watch us for today throughout all of our social media platforms. Get Going with GEPAR gets a chance to really tell you what's going on, also bring any news that needs to be breaking out or discussions that need to be talked about. And today we're going to be focusing on one of our committees, the Government Affairs Committee, which, full disclosure, I am the staff liaison here at GEPAR for the Government Affairs Committee. And recently, there was a big discussion that took place this Tuesday with members of the committee that then put out a vote to our board. And thanks to the help of our pick, which is Isabel Chacon, we're able to have Donald Pitts, who's going to be our guest, joining us shortly here to talk about the noise ordinance proposed by the city of El Paso, which, after Tuesday's discussion, led to Wednesday's meeting where the vote was supposed to take place. The vote has been pushed back, and it's thanks in part to many restaurant owners and people who are speaking about, and also the city coming up with a plan to look for a consultant to help out with the noise ordinance. A bit of a background so we go into context on this. The city of El Paso, and I'm going to bring Donald in first right now. And of course, as always, if you have any questions or conversation, things that you want to add, or you want to see a topic discussed here on Get Going with GEPAR, make sure to please email me at egarcia@gepar.org. And I want to just bring in Donald here real quick because he's our special guest. So Donald, good to see you there, sir. How you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So I want to go in a little bit more of context here to explain what was happening. The city had been looking at a noise ordinance as COVID has, with the COVID restrictions that have been pretty much put away for about a year now. Things have started to open up. Businesses started to open up, but still an outdoor patio scene and an outdoor entertainment scene is growing very fast in the city of El Paso. And as a result, that has led to many bars and restaurants having more entertainment value after 10 o'clock at night. Well, that has also caused some problems with some residents who live near those areas that have plenty of concerns, but one being sound and noise ordinance. So as of this past week, after being pushed back about at least 4 times from when the city was trying to reevaluate by changing decibel levels and enforcement and putting more stricter fines and penalties, the city has decided to continue to educate to try to find solutions and get involved with stakeholders. GEPAR, full disclosure, did speak out against this. Our members did speak out against this ordinance, but the main reason being that we felt that stakeholders need to be heard a little bit more and that there needs to be more discussion. And obviously this ordinance needs to be really looked at because the decibel levels, sound exchange would have been different. In fact, in the meeting that was taking place, that sound decibel level, the current city ordinance says it is 70 dB. Show that if you have sound that's below 70, you're within compliance. They wanted to change it to 65 throughout that meeting. That sound decibel level went up over 65 just with the speakers that they had indoors. So obviously this led to a lot of questions and a lot of people wondering that maybe that should be a slowdown, put the brakes on. That was discussed. There was obviously some city council members that not were happy with that. But Donald, you got a chance to see all this meeting. And like I said, I'm trying to bring the context best I can because this really has been going on for a while. But now there was a lot of reasons why people spoke up. And I want to get to what you saw this past Wednesday and your thoughts and what the city council is dealing with and what you were able to see from this past Wednesday.
Well, thank you. It was interesting to watch. It's very similar conversations that we see in a lot of cities when it comes to noise and sound. And I think our frustration is that, and I think there was one gentleman that spoke to council that talked about it's really pretty much common sense. It's really, and I really agree with that gentleman, that it's really more about the proximity to residential and just really having a good policy that really finds the balance. And I think that you can. And I think that the proposed amendments that they were proposing this week just wasn't. First of all, that wasn't realistic. We had talked earlier last week, and I talked to some folks in El Paso, and the 65 was was just not. It's like you wouldn't. Why would you want to pass an ordinance that would basically allow 99% of the businesses to be out of compliance? So it was just a, and I think we see this a lot too with cities. The policy lens when the permit process and the lead on this is really through code enforcement or the police departments. We kind of see a heavy lens with enforcement first, and then regulation and other stuff second.
All right. I have to bring up this question. What solutions, with your experience, do you feel the city needs to explore with getting a reasonable noise ordinance in place? Can somebody come in, a consultant, help them show the data, help them show things, and be able to come up with a reasonable one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the review of the ordinance that we looked at in El Paso. I mean, they've got a lot of the policy pieces there that they need. I mean, I think the one thing that they're lacking, it was just from my vantage point, and they could have someone, and I'm unaware of it. So, but just really having someone that's knowledgeable about the operation of venues and sound and noise. I think it's one thing that's missing. They took a lot of the stuff that we developed in Austin, 7 or 8 years ago, and some of that stuff is in the El Paso code. They're just not utilizing it the way that it needs to. And one is the sound impact plan that we developed. It really gives the opportunity to provide a professional analysis of the proposed outdoor amplified sound location. It's supposed to, if it's done correctly and by design, have an opportunity to provide community input, and then its ability to adjust the operational behavior of the businesses. And I got the sense from a lot of the conversations and statements and presentations from both city staff and is that it really comes down to it's a small number of bad actors. And I think I heard the word egregious, and I think we see that a lot. I think the one thing that I agreed with their proposal is really trying to find something, some type of penalty besides the typical $500 a day fine that the city could use for these egregious actors. And I think what we're also learning in every community is it's really the bad actors that are really causing this reaction from city government.
I'll tell you what, it's something that we're going to keep following. And as a result, to bring it up to par, this was voted on measure by the city council. They have decided that they want to hear more from consultants. They are going to take a more approach, and they hopefully will bring stakeholders involved. And I think they would hope that, and I know that it was broken out by one of our association members, that we would like to help facilitate those meetings if they can be done and be possible. Now, you have experience in Austin, Texas with the same matter that had come up. And as a result, you were able to make a huge impact there with the noise ordinance that also brought down the number of complaints. What was done there in Austin, and could it be applied here in El Paso?
No, absolutely. We had tried my first couple of years of being with the city and running the music and entertainment division there. I was given the sound ordinance and noise complaints, kind of said here, and they said, solve this. And so we went along with the traditional way of doing it, enforcement. I think the community itself was really frustrated because you'd go from zero enforcement to zero tolerance, back and forth. It seemed like every 6 to 8 months we would go from that. And so after a couple of years, we decided, let's just take a different approach, and kind of what we've learned from residents and business operators. And we found that just creating policy that really allowed to solve the problem. I think most sound ordinances that we've studied around the country really was just more punitive, and none of them really addressed or gave the ability to solve the problems. And so we called this eventually, 2 or 3 years into it, it was kind of named the community sound management approach, where we basically just created the right, added the right policy, and I think the important thing is implementation. What we're seeing now is you can have some of the best policy or smart policy, and if it's not implemented correctly, um, you're going to have the same problem you're going to have in El Paso. And not to say that the folks in El Paso are, I think they just need to understand the intent more of the policy that they do have and their ability. But it's really not about, it's really about coexisting. I think what we've learned is that we found later that some of the residents actually would go to the go and advocate on the venue's behalf to extend their hours. So I think where there were no relationships before with the businesses and the residents or the other businesses. I mean, we saw a hotel there the other day that spoke at council. Those vibrations should not be happening. To that. And I think if there was, and I think there's the foundation that they currently have in code has a sound impact plan, but I don't think it's not being used correctly to solve the problem. It's not about writing tickets. It's really about solving the problem. And what is that venue that's creating those bass frequencies and creating that vibration? I think that's the problems that you should solve. And that should either be on the venue for, to build sound walls or putting some mitigation applications in to prevent that sound wave from going over to the hotel.
This is a question I just want to bring up. Knowing what I know about sound and knowing what you know about sound, a lot of these materials, is it my belief that next to shortage supplies that could be somewhat of an issue, that you got to understand that sometimes it takes a while to get some of these things in, but when they're in place, they can really do a difference and make a difference for any business that's trying to control its sound and making sure they stay with compliance.
No, absolutely. And I think you're totally right about the supply chain issues, but in all of our, I was the one that regulated all the venues and put the restrictions and other sound, not really more restrictions, but more of here's their times that they can go and here's the decibel levels that they can go based on proximity to residential and based on the design. We found that just a lot of the practical common sense approaches to sound weren't being implemented in these businesses. The stage was, a lot of cases, probably 80% of the cases where the sound was, the stage was facing right towards residential. So we would come in and say, hey, make your stage that way. A lot of times it was just turning the speakers, instead of putting the speaker placement, and it's sound in a lot of these venues and bars and nightclubs are hard reflective surfaces. So the sound will just ricochet off. So it's some sound absorption stuff, but all of our recommendations or requirements with venues, we would work with them on sourcing out some stuff. The other thing that we did from a city government's perspective is I purchased a bunch of mobile sound walls that were and we would loan them to the businesses to put up. So when we do a sound test, we would put them up to see if if it was going to work. So instead of requiring a business to do a sound wall and spend $5,000, $10,000, we would put this up and say, look, is it going to work or not? And so most of the time, it did work effectively. The other thing is there's a lot of products that are sold as other items that are a whole lot cheaper. So like a roll of sound, rubberized sound mitigation stuff, it could be $300, but you can go to Tractor Supply, and we had business owners found the same product at Tractor Supply and other places for like a fraction of the cost. So it was really more of just a partnership approach of working together to manage the sound, having the right policy in place to really more of, like I said, a problem solving approach instead of a punitive approach.
Well, as we look past this week, you saw the meetings, you saw what our association spoke out against. Did city council members make the right decision in looking forward to bring a consultant in to see if they can get this solved, and knowing that they're going to have to really look closely at some things and hear more people out?
I did. It's always a very bittersweet, when you're seeing those council decisions and you kind of understand the the frustration from the folks that were, recommending to approve it. I think the council, without a doubt, did make the right decision. I think that the data that the staff showed actually supported that. I do think there ought to be some creative ways to. I said the bad actors. I mean, our big philosophy is separating good actors and bad actors, and I think there needs to be some more creative ways to do that. The only thing that I didn't really, I think postponing it and really getting some kind of an outside third party is important. I think a lot of cities in Austin was that way as well in our work there, and the cities that we're working in now. I think the cities, it's like a three-legged stool partnership. It's the community, it's residents, the city, and businesses. And I think all three of those have to work together. I don't think though that these conversations should take a year. I mean, I think having a third party independent person that's very familiar with these, that kind of can not streamline everything, but make it more efficient. I think I think we've heard most of the stories that you can hear, not that they're important or not important, but we've heard it all. And I think what they're wanting is a entertainment districts too. Is that what was the other part of that?
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't think it should take a year. I mean, I think 9 months would be, max. And the other thing, we've been in situations before where, we've passed certain legislation in the middle of, while we were doing the work, there were certain stages of the process. So the city might, 6 months from now may pass certain elements of the sound ordinance. I mean, I'm a bigger fan of tweaking the ordinances instead of doing just throwing in a kitchen sink, trying to, I think it's usually, we had more success over 2 or 3 years by just really tweaking the ordinances after we found out what was either not working or could work better with more clear policy.
Well, Don, I appreciate your time as always, and we thank you for that. We'll see how things play out. I know this position is going up, and we'll see how everything goes. And obviously, if you're in El Paso, we look forward to taking you out to see some of these areas.
All right, I'd love to see them.
Yeah, and of course, do you have your own sound decibel meter that you could bring and double check on things?
I do.
And just out of curiosity, what kind of equipment is that? What does that look like? How much?
That's another question. I mean, so part of our requirement and the sound impact plans was to have the venues have a sound meter. Mm-hmm. We found that actually would really help them become more mindful and thoughtful of the sound they were producing. So we would require like a type 2, because there's 3 types. There's type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is what usually law enforcement uses, which are really expensive, and we could hold up in court. We have a type 2 sound meter. I got it at Granger Electric years ago, and that's kind of what we did. Most of the clubs that we would require. I think Radio Shack had a really good one.
There's a place that's not there anymore, though.
Yeah, it's a place that's not there.
Well, Don, I mentioned that because when I look at these, what about apps? Are the apps somewhat reliable or not going to be compared to what those are?
Apps are terrible.
Apps are terrible.
Yeah, apps are terrible. We worked with the police department here years ago, and we kind of measured some of the apps. There were some that were better than others, but there was a 6 to 12 dB difference.
Okay.
Always, and that's when you're 12 dB difference, that's a pretty significant number of decibels. But and that was kind of the thing. As I said, we just kind of wanted to get away from the app, because we would have screenshots of different apps, and we would finally, tell the residents or the businesses, like, look, mobile apps are kind of good to get an idea, but they're not that sophisticated.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's Get Going with GEPAR. As always, I'm Ernesto Garcia, Communications Director for the Greater El Paso Association of Realtors. And of course, you can email me if you have any suggestions or any questions you want to bring up, or something that we need to be focusing on. Get Going with GEPAR, because that's who we are. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk with